Welcome to the Playing Hooky podcast with your hosts Rachel and Nathan, brought to you by UtilityMuffinLabs.com. Consistently rated adequate.
Welcome everybody to the Playing Hooky podcast. I am Rachel.
And I'm Nathan.
Thanks for joining us. I'm really glad we're doing this podcast today because I don't know about you, but I definitely needed to play some hooky. It's been like a rough couple of weeks. Not really like for any particular reason other than work has just been really busy and I was sick and just, you know, all the normal adult crap you got to deal with. Yeah. And so the fact that we were able to get together again and record a podcast for you lovely people really means a lot to me. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. But what are we talking about today, Nathan?
So we are talking about the movie Fullmetal Jacket and
because I like puns.
And the anime Fullmetal Alchemist, which are completely unrelated.
Totally unrelated, other than they share two words in their titles.
Yeah, they sound reasonably similar.
They do.
And they're not.
And they're totally not. I feel like we came to the conclusion to watch this. So if you guys have been paying attention, listening to the last few podcasts, you know that Nate is a big movie buff, and this summer a lot of cool movies he's really into have been re-released in the theaters, whether we're talking about IMAX or just regular screen. And we went and saw Apocalypse Now on IMAX about a month ago.
Yeah, we talked about it in our last episode.
Yeah, and I feel like, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like this really gave you a hankering for Vietnam War movies. Because it was like the next day or the day after when we were at Half Price Books doing our usual let's pop into Half Price Books and look and see if they have any Vampire the Masquerade books, because my boy Nathan reads them all the time for his other podcast. And you came across a copy of Full Metal Jacket and you're like, oh my God, have you ever seen this? You've got to see it. And I was like, let's do a podcast.
I actually went in looking for it.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of background about this,
Yeah, no, tell me.
So we went in to the half-price books, and, you know, like she said, I'm always there looking for, you know, vampire books or White Wolf books, because that's, you know, I do a podcast that's related to that.
And you're a collector, let's be fair.
Yeah, right. And I'm trying to rebuild my collection of books. And so anyways, we saw Apocalypse Now, and I was like, oh, well, you know, maybe you would like this other movie that's a Vietnam movie. I don't know why I thought you would like it, because you didn't really like Apocalypse Now.
I didn't hate Apocalypse Now. Right. It was just like something that when I saw the first time, I was like, glad I've seen it. Probably wouldn't watch it again. So then when I saw it for the second time, I was like, my original conclusion was correct. So I didn't think it was terrible, but I think that you were kind of maybe in an apologetic way, like, well, let me show you something else that maybe you'll like more, that I really like. And so I was all about it. I didn't know anything about Full Metal Jacket other than it was a war movie. And so
anyways, we go there, we get the movie. I pick it up on DVD because it's like $5 on DVD, and we get home. And when we get home, the next day I open up the case, and, you know, I'm just looking at the movie, and it was in the case upside down. And so I flip it over, and it's a completely different movie.
It was Easy Rider.
Yeah, it's Easy Rider. And I was like, well, as cool as that would be to watch.
And I was all about it. I was like, I've never seen Easy Rider. We could watch that. And he's like, no.
Right.
No.
We set out to watch a movie. I wasn't cool with that. So I went back. They had no problem. They let me return it. Well, so interestingly enough, from the point where I purchased it to the point where I returned it, somebody had sold a Blu-ray copy of it. So I got a Blu-ray, which was better.
Even better.
Yeah, so awesome adventure. But yeah, so got it on Blu-ray and came home because I couldn't find it really anywhere to stream it all. So yeah. So picked it up.
Good story.
And, yeah, cool story. So what is the movie about? The movie is about some young people training to go to Vietnam.
Right.
Basically, their experience in boot camp.
Yeah. So we watched the movie, and basically, well, do you want to kind of tell the overview of the movie, or should I?
So it's a movie.
You might have a more positive explanation.
Directed and produced and written by Stanley Kubrick, And it is a movie where you have a group of recruits who are in boot camp training to go to Vietnam. And they're training on Paris Island.
And they've been drafted. So maybe they're not all necessarily there because they necessarily want to be in the military.
Right. Probably none of them want to be there. And then, so it's their process of training, and you have some key characters, Joker, who is played by Matthew Modine, who's kind of like the main character. If there were a main character, he would be the main character. At times he is the narrator, so I guess it's kind of his story.
Mm-hmm.
And another character you have is Private Pyle, and Private Pyle is played by
Vincent D'Onofrio.
Vincent D'Onofrio, and he plays sort of I don't know, like maybe someone who's maybe challenged or...
Yeah, I kept asking Nate, I was like, are you sure he's not simple? Like, it was really hard to tell by the way he was playing the character, whether the character was just so jarred by being yelled at and being at boot camp that he was just kind of dumbfounded, or if he was actually like perhaps mentally handicapped. It was hard to tell.
In the synopsis on Wikipedia, they say that he is overweight and dim-witted.
Dim-witted. That would be a good word to describe this character.
And they give him, so Arlie Ermey plays the drill instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman. And basically this is like the role that everybody knows him for. Like he plays like an obvious...
If you've ever seen an actor on TV going, "What's your major malfunction, maggot?" It's probably this guy who actually played that character in this movie, which, yeah, was pretty interesting to find out. You kind of spit me a little bit of trivia about him, that he was actually in the military. And I don't know if he was a drill sergeant, but he was hired by Stanley Kubrick and staff to advise on the movie on, like, this is how a drill sergeant would behave, and this is how things he would say, and this is how he would act. And so he was kind of explaining all of this to the actor who was supposed to play the drill sergeant, and then Stanley Kubrick and crew were like, okay, why don't you just play this character?
I believe that the actor who was originally hired to play the drill instructor, it plays a character later in the movie. He plays the gunner on the helicopter.
Okay.
Who's like shooting just anybody that they pass by.
Gotcha. Okay.
I believe he was originally hired for that role, and then the Arlie Ermey basically took over that role.
Okay, cool. So anyway, you've got this group of guys who are in boot camp. They're getting ready to go to Vietnam, and they're in the Marines. So it's not just Army, it's Marine boot camp. So that's like the first half of the movie. And there's kind of, I won't spoil it because there's probably a lot of people like me who'd never seen this movie, but there's kind of like a pivotal point in their boot camp, and the movie changes tone immediately and shifts. And then sort of the movie can be divided into two halves. When they're at boot camp, where Joker is at boot camp, and then when Joker goes to Vietnam, and then sort of the saga of one of his missions while he's in Vietnam is the second half of the movie.
So the latter half of the movie is set during the Tet Offensive in Da Nang. So it's basically boot camp, and it's like the entirety of boot camp essentially, and then like a very short, like few day or couple, maybe like a week period during Vietnam, during the actual war.
Cool. So before I get into my opinion of the movie and kind of my thoughts and feelings, I'd like to know two things. Why do you like this movie so much? And what about it did you think that I would really get behind?
Why do I like the movie? Well, I think honestly, it's like one of the most quotable movies.
It is super quotable.
And in retrospect, I mean, we know that like the military doesn't treat people now like they did in this movie. I don't know if it's an accurate portrayal of how they ever treated people in the military, but I know that now that's not how boot camp goes. That's not what boot camp is like. I've talked to enough people in the military to know that this isn't an accurate portrayal of today's military. But it is super quotable, and especially to like an adolescent, teenage boy, like, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman and like his insults, like those are insults that people who have never even seen this movie probably have repeated in their day.
Yeah, and didn't even know that they were quoting this movie.
So there is that, and I just think that I like this for the same reason I like most war movies, and I don't think that I like them for the same reason that other people do. I think it's just the journey, like sort of the horror of human life and the sort of the horror of war is exemplified in a lot of these movies. Like a lot of people watch war movies, like old John Wayne movies, old World War II movies, like you're following the heroes, right? The heroes are going through war and they're overcoming obstacles and they're becoming better in the end. Modern war movies, I don't think do that, especially wars that revolve around like the Vietnam War, which wasn't such a cut and dry war as World War II is perceived to be, right? World War II is kind of like, you know, it's the Americans and the side of virtue against Nazis, against a obvious villain, the bad guys, right? So it's kind of like a good versus evil story. And stories about Vietnam and, you know, even some of the things that have happened after Vietnam, they don't really have that same straight and narrow perspective. And you have people, you know, young men in most of these going through sort of harrowing circumstances and being forced to do it, especially when you're, you know, a soldier who's drafted into the war. You don't ever have the option to make a decision about what you're going to do one way or the other, right? You have to perform or, you know, you go to jail or something. So,
right.
Or you die. And so movies like this, I enjoy watching because I enjoy sort of those like real life horror stories.
Okay.
Also, I think just the acting in this movie is really interesting. And then also, you know, this movie, it took me a long time to actually enjoy Full Metal Jacket. Full Metal Jacket is one of those movies that Stanley Kubrick's done that a lot of people are divided on because I think of the same points you're going to bring up, but they're divided because the tempo really seems off. Right? It seems like two separate movies. And there doesn't really seem to be a plot that sort of follows through in it.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why I like it. It's just kind of like you open up and you see all of these men sort of being, you know, all the hair shaved, and it's sort of like their identity being stripped away. And then all of the men that are in this movie go through that same sort of personality being stripped away and being forced to conform. And then you see at the end, the latter half of the movie, how their personalities sort of develop in this war. And then it's over. And at the end, they're singing the Mickey Mouse Club song. It's just really kind of bizarre and yeah, so I don't know exactly why. It also like the John Wayne thing comes up too.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So Joker does this terrible John Wayne impression throughout the movie, and you know it took me a while to like really kind of understand, but I think Stanley Kubrick was really like kind of sticking the pin in that old John Wayne war movie mentality and showing you, no, not everybody's a hero. Not everybody can perform under this pressure. And not everybody is not everything's cut and dry in that John Wayne sort of way. But I could be completely reading that, you know, apropos of nothing.
No, I mean, I think that that's an interesting insight, and it could be that was sort of like a thread that you were supposed to pull to get out of the movie. Why did you think I'd like it? Just because you like it?
I don't know. Just because I want everybody to like what I like.
Okay. All right. Well, I didn't like it. It was so. I'll say I liked part of it. I liked parts of it. There are parts of it that I liked. I wouldn't watch it again. And I probably would tell everybody that they can skip it. Go watch The Shining. It's a better Stanley Kubrick movie. So the first half of the movie I thought was pretty interesting. And I was getting the feeling that it was sort of like a black comedy. That's the impression I was getting. And I enjoyed, even though there didn't seem to be like an underlying plot other than just these guys going through boot camp and what that experience was like, I was okay with that because the characters seemed pretty interesting. And I liked what was happening from a character standpoint and how the story was being driven along. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. Like, here's a movie about Vietnam, that's just about boot camp, that's just about like these guys and their experience. And I thought that was really interesting and kind of novel. Because, you know, most war movies, it's like you take character, you take hero, you plop him in a war zone, and you see how he reacts to the chaos that's around him, which, and how his character develops through that chaos, which was kind of like Apocalypse Now, or, you know, name most other modern war movies. And then the movie took a turn, and it was like the second half of the movie, it was like a brand new, different story. That I didn't dislike necessarily, because there are other movies that do something similar where the first half of the movie is like a movie, and then the second half of the movie is a completely different story. One movie that comes to mind that's probably not held in the same esteem as Fullmetal Jacket, or maybe it is, I don't know, but is From Dusk Till Dawn. That is clearly two distinctly different movies in the beginning and the end, right? You've got, you know, your characters who are these criminals, bank robbers that are kidnapping this family to get across the border to Mexico, and then all of a sudden, it's a vampire horror movie and everyone dies. Like, there's not really anything in that first half of the movie that necessarily sets you up for what's coming in that second half of the story. And that's definitely true of Full Metal Jacket. The first half and the second half are like, you know, two sides of a coin.
However, I feel like they're not exactly the same in the sense that, like, there is like a fade to black cut in Full Metal Jacket, whereas like From Dusk Till Dawn is just like you're in it and then suddenly there's vampires.
Yeah, no, there's some technical differences, and it's not a perfect analogy, but that was just like one example of another movie that I could think of where you've got story A, story B, same characters, two different stories happening in the same movie, right? Yeah. Essentially. But it wasn't the fade to black or the huge transition that kind of threw me off. What happened was in the second half of the movie when they go to Vietnam, I watched it and I tried and I couldn't see any point to the story. There was just, and you know, this is going to make some people mad, but this is just my take on the movie, my impression. There was no story. There was no point. It was a guy who was kind of maybe a liberal-leaning guy who didn't necessarily want to be in the war, but had kind of accepted his position. He's like, well, now I'm in it. I'm going to embrace it. And then goes off with a group of other soldiers to perform a mission or to, I didn't even really pick up on exactly what the point was of them going out and doing reconnaissance or scouting or whatever they were doing.
So
I think they were just trying to get from A to B.
Joker's character is a wartime.
Yeah, no, I got that he was a journalist and that he's a wartime journalist for like the military news. And he was trying to get out there and you know, be able to report back what was going on. But it kind of seemed like they got into some shit and that necessarily wasn't able to happen. And so that it was just became sort of like a struggle to survive. And it's kind of no story. We're introduced to new characters. No story. There's more walking and shooting and walking and shooting. Then we get to the end of the movie and Joker's faced with a decision. That's a life or death decision, and everyone else kind of chickens out from doing what we, the audience, would perceive to be a really hard choice, but maybe the right thing to do. And then Joker makes his decision on whether to follow through with choice A or choice B, to do something or to do nothing. And then the movie's over. And I'm like, okay, so... And I even asked Nate, we were like about, 75% through the second half of the movie, just before we get to Joker's big choice. And I'm like, what's the story of this? And I was kind of irritated. I was like, I've invested a lot of time in sitting here watching this movie. And it's, I've listened to some hyperbolic, grotesque language, which I'm not like a delicate flower. That didn't really bother me. But in my mind, like, I just had a hard time getting behind it because I didn't feel like the second half of the movie had a story. And if it had, I could have forgiven some things, but it didn't feel like it did. And then like this was the impression I was left with, and this could be totally wrong. I feel like Stanley Kubrick and Hollywood had a definite opinion about the Vietnam War. And although America at large, their opinion may have been the same, I felt like they Okay, so let me back up. Let's get a little political here. I think most Americans would now agree that the Vietnam War was a huge mistake. We should have never done that. We should have never gotten involved. And at the time when soldiers were coming back from the Vietnam War, they were treated like vermin. They were treated like villains. And the way that the populace of this country treated those veterans was pretty terrible because we had a big problem with going to this war. But it wasn't the fault of the soldiers. It was the fault of the government who sent those soldiers. And I really felt like the second half of this movie, not to say that the soldiers were completely innocent or that they were all angels or they were like, I'm here against my will. You know, there are people who definitely didn't go because they thought it was wrong. A great example is Muhammad Ali. Google Muhammad Ali not going to Vietnam because he, you know, and there were that's just a famous example, but there are lots of people who objected to going and serving in that war. However, those who did were kind of just doing what their government told them to do. And not that it excuses what they did at all, but then when they got back, they were basically treated like shit. And so as I'm watching this movie and I'm seeing the second half of this movie depict these soldiers as basically terrible people doing terrible things and totally demonizing them, it's felt like they were demonizing the characters and the soldiers themselves rather than demonizing their actions. It felt like they wrote the characters and had them portrayed in such a way that you were just disgusted with these soldiers and there was no redeeming qualities in any of them. And that's something very, very different than what Apocalypse Now did, where you see soldiers doing horrible, atrocious things that morally they know is wrong or they may not agree with, but they're complex characters being driven by a plot. And even though you disagree with them wholeheartedly, you can still kind of relate to their struggle. These characters, you could not relate to their struggle, and they were doing atrocious things.
Well, you don't think it's maybe criticizing two different things?
I don't know. Like, I mean, that was just the impression that I got. And let me finish my point. Like, I'm not saying that. It just kind of left me with a bad taste in my mouth where I felt like the movie was really demonizing all of the soldiers across the board and not looking at these characters complexly just to drive home a point that, like, fuck war, fuck Vietnam, this was wrong, fuck these people. It just didn't sit well with me. And I'm not like this super staunch conservative person that's like...
I definitely don't disagree.
Yeah.
I mean, so... I don't agree with your opinion.
That's fine.
I don't agree with how you see it because I see it as a criticism on something else.
Okay.
But I think that they're both looking at the same war or using the war as sort of a background for a criticism of two completely different things. Mm-hmm. But I think that the war can easily criticize those different things. I think in Apocalypse Now is trying to shine a light on themes in like the themes of Colonel Kurtz and the atrocities that he's bringing on people. Mm-hmm. It shows you how fundamentally flawed war is.
Right? Absolutely.
By we're all committing atrocities, but your atrocities are more atrocious. And so that shines a light on sort of like the terrible things that we do and how we've promoted you to this level.
Right.
And so now we send someone to kill him.
Yeah.
Right?
I get behind that and I agree with you there.
With this one, I think that this shows adolescent men. And I think it shows a criticism of masculinity. And I think Joker's a prime example of that criticism of masculinity, of men holding the bearing of being men, right? Mm-hmm. Even though they're not. And Joker, a good example of that is wearing the Born to Kill on his helmet and wearing a peace sign, right? So here's someone who is not even confident in his identity, right? Because he's got that machismo, that Born to Kill, I'm a warrior here, but he also has that 60s, like, you know, the whole peace craze. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's more a criticism on how we raise men, how we raise boys into men and make boys go through these rites of passage to become men and sort of hold these ideals. And at the end of the movie, they're all singing the Mickey Mouse Club. So it's like we're forcing children to be men and go commit atrocities in the name of freedom or peace or whatever, but we're really not ever teaching them how to be men.
So I think that is a really powerful statement that you're making, that you say the movie's making. It's not what I got out of it.
Okay. Totally fair.
But now that you explain it to me in that way, I can kind of say, okay, I can see if that's what they're trying to do there. I can see that and buy into it. What it seemed like to me was look at all these like stupid fucking guys doing these horrible things. Sure. And it didn't seem like there was a story driving it, and there wasn't any anchor for me, the audience, to buy into it. It just didn't. It was such a flip from the first part of the movie where I was all in, and even though Joker was kind of starting to do some of these like more toxic activities, like hazing someone and being kind of like a jack off, even though he was doing things he clearly didn't agree with, to fit in and to be part of the crowd, like. I found that interesting and I got behind it. And I think that this what you're saying could have been accomplished without switching the movie on its head and giving us 45 minutes of them wandering around shooting people.
I think that Stanley Kubrick is known for being sort of like a very intellectual filmmaker. Like there's always some additional reason. But I also agree with you. I think that like the shift really is jarring. And I feel like one of those should have been focused on more. Like it should have just been either a movie about boot camp or a movie about Vietnam with a little bit of boot camp. Like I think that like it's basically like two completely separate films, and neither one of them is long enough to be a film. So I agree with you on that. I think structurally the film doesn't have a standard structure. Yeah. But I still like it.
Yeah, no.
But I like it for different reasons than I did when I was 15 years old.
Yeah, well, that's good. That means that this movie really does have staying power, because it's something that, like I don't know how many things I've gone back to that I enjoyed when I was a teenager or a kid, and I'm like, oh God, that's terrible. Right? But then this movie grew with you and you got more or different things out of it as you got older. And perhaps like I just, you say Stanley Kubrick's like a very intellectual filmmaker. Maybe I'm just not smart enough to get it, or maybe I'm not like on his wavelength, or maybe I just need to give it another chance.
Or it's possible you just don't like it.
Yeah, it could be that I just don't like it.
Some films just aren't for everybody. I think that honestly, your opinion about this movie is something that I completely relate to because of what you had me watch.
So this is a good transition. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is we're going to switch from Full Metal Jacket to Fullmetal Alchemist. Now, let me preface this by saying something. I'm not a big fan of anime. However, I have seen Fullmetal Alchemist, and I thought it would be funny because of the title to have Nate watch it. And also, like, I was like, well, this isn't, this is not terrible. You can probably like sit through a couple episodes of this. So Fullmetal Alchemist is an anime based on a manga, as most anime are, from the early 2000s. And then the anime came out, I believe, in around 2010-ish time frame. So it's roughly about a decade old. Now there are two versions, and there's some super nerds who maybe can correct me on this, or if you know a lot about it, shoot us some feedback on Twitter or YouTube or whatever. But I believe Fullmetal Alchemist, the title, Fullmetal Alchemist anime, came out first, but the manga wasn't finished yet. And then Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is a similar season that's sort of a retelling of the first anime, but is actually much, much closer to the original manga. So if you've seen one and then you watch the other, you'd be like, oh my God, these stories are almost the same, but they're a little bit different. And so I believe that's the distinction. So if you were to look for it on Netflix, because you can find it right now on Netflix, perhaps other places as well, you'll see there's Fullmetal Alchemist and Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. I had always heard through the grapevine that Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood was better. So that's what I suggested to Nate that we watch. Now, I have seen most of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, although it's been several years. When I watched it the first time, I was like, okay, this is interesting. It's a pretty good story. It's basically, it takes place in a world that is like ours, but isn't ours, in like an adjacent timeline. and things like alchemy and magic and are real. And there are these two brothers. They're called the Elric brothers, Edward and Alphonse, who are sort of gifted and that they're able to use alchemy at a very young age. And they're so good at alchemy that most alchemists need to create an alchemy circle or be able to draw out symbols on the ground or on themselves to be able to use alchemy to change matter from one form to another. But the Elric brothers are so gifted that they don't have to do that. Well, story happens and bad things happen, and the Elric brothers go through a change. And essentially, the older brother, Edward Elric, becomes inducted into the military as a very young teenager as one of the state alchemists. And it's kind of tells their story about them trying to find redemption, and they've gone through some injuries. So Elric's actually, or Edward's actually missing his arm and part of his leg. And then Alphonse, his younger brother, through an alchemy accident that I won't get into because I don't want to spoil the show if you want to watch it, he actually loses his body, but his brother was able to capture his spirit and his soul in this suit of armor. So they both are kind of wandering the countryside looking for redemption and trying to figure out how to, one, restore Edward's body back to normal, and then two, restore Alphonse's body just back to a body so that he's not like a walking empty suit of armor. And it's actually pretty cool, and there's some really, really neat themes in the show. Now, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of anime, and when I had watched it previously, I thought it was okay. I thought it was good. I didn't think anything of it. But I was suggested that we watch at least a couple episodes to kind of tie in with the Full Metal Jacket theme. And so anyway, I said, hey, Nate, let's watch a couple episodes.
And we did. I watched 4.
You watched 4.
I watched 4
and
episodes.
We watched Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood.
Yeah.
So the second one that's supposed to be more like the manga.
So the show starts off with this character, I believe, who's an alchemist, and he's like trying, I don't know what he's trying to do, like destroy the city, and he's like set up all these sigils everywhere, and he's like trying to blow up the
He's got a beef with the military, and
Right.
he's trying to blow up the president's headquarters,
Right.
which this takes place in like an alternate version of Germany.
Yeah.
So they actually call the president the Führer. So that's interesting.
Yeah,
Anyway.
that was like the first question that I had. I was like, well, okay, I don't understand, like, when does this take place? So we kind of find out that it takes place in like a 1920s or 1930s Germany.
But like in an
kinda?
alternate universe.
Right, in an
Germany.
alternate universe. And so first and foremost, I'll say that anime always messes with me because there are certain things that I really like about some anime that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Storytelling, I think that some of the stories, especially this one, when they're really super serious, they appeal to me. Like when they're dark and there's like, one of the things that comes up later on is an alchemist who his wife went missing, and then he's like trying to keep his alchemist's license and still be a part of the military, and so he does like something very desperate, and then his daughter goes missing, and like those stories to me were very interesting. When we are like being told in a flashback about the Elric brothers and their mother passing away, and how they sort of pushed the limitations of alchemy to such a degree, and like they end up in like this sort of like alternate universe, and
Almost
and
like hell.
right?
Yeah.
And like all the stuff that happens with that's stuff that I really enjoy. But what really takes me out of it is all of the anime-esque tropes, like the weird exclamation marks, and when the artwork is all primitive, and like the main character, I don't remember what his name is, but Edward is not a likable character because he has a problem with being called small. They're both children, right? And one of the themes that runs through it is that his brother's spirit is tied to this giant suit of armor. And so really cool looking armor, and everybody thinks he's the Full Metal Alchemist because he's like this big suit of armor, and obviously he's not. And so Edward is always getting upset because people are confusing the two, or they call him little.
Yeah.
And, you know, they make mention of his size.
They can't believe, like, oh, I can't believe someone so small could be the Full Metal Alchemist because he's renowned, right? And the reason he's called the Full Metal Alchemist is because he's got one of his arms is made of, like, automail, so it's metal, right? So then everyone sees him going around with the suit of armor, and they're like, that's the Full Metal Alchemist. And then when Edward's like, I'm actually the Full Metal Alchemist, he gets mad because people are like, how could something so small?
But they do all of this kind of like anime stuff where like he becomes like a giant head of teeth, and he's so angry, and he's like this, you know, impudent little, you know, angry mongoose looking guy. And I hate that stuff.
Yeah, the kind of the cutesy anime stuff. That
I absolutely don't like it. And I am the type of person where when someone asks me like, hey, do you like anime? My default is to say no. That's not to say I don't like some anime. There are a few that I like, but they're so few and far between. My default is to say no, I don't like anime, because generally the style just doesn't do it for me. And I tried really hard to watch, and I prefer to watch these subtitled. I don't really care for dubbed anime, and subtitle didn't, you know, there was no real difference between like watching it dubbed or watching it subtitled. It's all the little anime things and like the little cutesy pixie art that just takes me out of the story. You know, like anime that I enjoy is like Fist of the North Star, right? It's just, it's done in like that sort of Japanese animation style. But it's like, it's not even so much that it's a more serious story, because it's also really ridiculous, but it just doesn't have those little cutesy things that breaks my immersion. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it is. I would like to watch more of this, but those things break my immersion to such a degree. And also, there's another habit in anime where like the main character is like, he's like super powered, or maybe like his power is there, but it's just like undeveloped, and everybody's like super scared of it. But then like they persist to like knock the crap out of him and show like how utterly useless he is. And so like, I don't get that either. It's like, if the character is like this great, powerful, like I don't need to make sigils to use alchemy, he then like continues to get the crap kicked out of him. And like the boring old man character is always just like the effortless badass. Mm-hmm. It's just to me, there was nothing remarkable about this anime. And it was just like an example of everything I've seen in other ones before. And I've never read it. I've never seen the Full Metal Alchemist previously. It's just everything about this, it like ticked all the boxes of what I don't like about anime.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say like I could definitely feel your frustration while we were watching it, because it seeing how you were reacting to it, like you would be into it for about 5 minutes, and then like, I'll just call it quote silly anime stuff would happen, and you'd be like, God dang it, like, and I could tell like you were ruining it, and then they were spoiling it, or you were enjoying it and then they were spoiling it for you, and then you were enjoying it and then they were spoiling it for you, and it was almost exhausting to like sit next to you and see this happen over and over again. And I was like, I don't really want to watch more of this. Like I can't get past the fact that you are just being disappointed every 5 minutes.
And like, I didn't want to, you know, I watch stuff like this, and you know, I want to have an open mind. Yeah. You know, I want to enjoy the things that you enjoy.
Well, let me put that out there. This is something that I kind of had a passing interest in. It was not ever anything that I was like super passionate about, or that like I would ever be like, oh my God, you've never seen Full Metal Alchemist? It wasn't anything like that. It was mostly just because like it amused me that it was called Full Metal Alchemist, really, and we watched Full Metal Jacket.
What really bothered me about it though was you could tell, and I talked to one of our friends, Chris, and he was like, yeah, you know, if you can get past all the anime stuff, there's like really poignant moral concepts that are brought up.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get past, because like this one was really, really egregious with that stuff.
Yeah.
And just having like the main character being so desperately unlikable, you would think that someone who had lost their mother, had gone well beyond the realm of acceptability in their chosen like style of magic. We'll just call it that. Like took alchemy to the very limits and beyond, and lost parts of his body, would be humbled by that experience.
Yeah.
And would actually grow and develop as a character. And that's not what this character is. And maybe that happens later on down the road.
Yeah.
I don't know. But in 4 episodes, the character is utterly unlikable.
Yeah.
And has like a little brother that's in like a suit of armor that's totally likable. And like you want to know more about that character and you sympathize with that character. But the main character,
he's like an arrogant jerk.
Right.
Yeah.
He's the worst. And there's nothing redeemable about him. And I was like, I get why people like anime, but I don't.
Yeah. No, that's totally fair. I am going to make you watch some other anime, though, that I do like a lot more.
Well, then I will also make you watch some that I like.
Some anime?
Some anime. So that way maybe we can appeal to each other and show like, okay, this is what I like about anime.
And then maybe like learn some more together about like, maybe we're kind of ignorant in the different styles of anime, and like there's just like a certain style that Fullmetal Alchemist kind of fits in. It's just not our bag, but maybe there's like other styles out there that we really could get behind.
But also I've learned too, like, we do a lot of tabletop role playing, and I've learned there's been experiences I've had where I sit down at a tabletop role playing game with people, and like I usually have a very serious mindset. Like I try to read the material and think of it from a very like pulpy, visceral experience, right? Like, I don't like just beat 'em up games, but I noticed that there's a lot of crossover for tabletop gamers and anime. And I'm thinking maybe the reason why I never understood why people play in a different way than me is also because like I don't understand anime. And like those people are really influenced by anime, and they're kind of like that's their example of like adventure, right? And like so that's what they're trying to reproduce because that's what they like. And so I'm thinking maybe watching some more anime can help me to like mellow me out when I sit down at a table with a person who has a different perspective on what tabletop role playing is.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it. And I want to like watch more of the movies that you like Full Metal Jacket. I don't, just because I didn't like that movie, or like maybe it just kind of hit me at the wrong time of the day. Maybe I watched it kind of late in the evening and I was tired and I wasn't like open to the experience.
That's
right?
a cool idea. I like that you have that concept, but probably not. I mean, it's probably you just don't like it.
Yeah. Well, but I'm saying like just because like there was this one movie that I didn't like, and it doesn't mean that like more of the more visceral, dark, realistic stuff that you do enjoy you can't bring to the table, because I like that stuff too. And I can think of lots of examples of lots of movies that are very realistic and dark and really challenge your perceptions that I do enjoy. So this just wasn't for me.
I like a lot of camp too. So, I mean, it's not necessarily all seriousness all the time.
Yeah.
Like I like some really shitty horror movies that are just like goofy, campy, silly. We talked about From Dusk Till Dawn, and I think From Dusk Till Dawn is like supremely campy.
Oh, for sure. But isn't it great?
Yeah.
It's so
but
fun.
I love it. It's a great movie.
It's really good. All right, cool. Well, thanks for playing hooky with us, everyone. Let us know what you think. Are you a big fan of Full Metal Jacket? Am I totally wrong here? Do I need to give it another chance? And maybe recommend some anime that Nate could get into. I'm definitely going to have him watch some Miyazaki movies in the future. Definitely Spirited Away, because that's one of my favorites. But like what else should we explore? What else should we get into in our free time when we're playing hooky from all the bull crap we got to do in a 9-to-5 kind of realm? So thank you, Nathan,
You're
for
welcome.
Introducing me to a new movie that now I know I will never watch again.
And likewise with the anime, we can both take our full medals and never share them with each other again.
Cross that off the list.
All right. Well, thank you folks for listening, and we'll be back soonish. We'll be back soon. I think we do one of these every 2 weeks. So we've been able to maintain that schedule. So wait for us in 2 weeks, and we'll be back with a new episode.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you to those people who have left us comments places and sent us messages. We really appreciate it, and it lets us know that you enjoy listening to what we're doing.
Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave comments directly on the video. Did you know that?
I did know that, yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a comment for us, or if you're listening to this on our website, utilitymuffinlabs.com, you can leave comments there as well. So thank you guys for listening, watching, playing hooky with us.
Whatever.
And we'll be back next time.
All right, cool.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey folks, this is Rachel from utilitymuffinlabs.com. If you enjoyed the Playing Hooky podcast, think about supporting us. For more podcasts, art, videos, and gaming, go to utilitymuffinlabs.com. Follow our podcast on Twitter @HookyPodcast, on Instagram and Facebook at our Utility Muffin Labs name, and support us on YouTube at Utility Muffin Labs. Check out our other gaming-related podcasts, 25 Years of Vampire the Masquerade and the Nerd Words podcast. Thank you all for your support. Utility Muffin Labs, consistently rated adequate.